Hello, my name is Jackson Rainey, and today I'll be discussing a flight scenario from Palm Beach International, Florida to Spring Point in the Bahamas. This is just covering a humanitarian aid trip from the US to the Bahamas just for relief. First, I'll discuss pre-departure considerations. More specifically, I'll cover considerations to the Bahamas first. Passengers going to the Bahamas really just need to bring their passports. Of course, they're going to want to bring luggage and any other belongings they may want to bring. However, the key thing here is that they need to bring their passport according to AOPA 2016. Airport pre-departure considerations include that the aircraft's going to need an ID data plate, 12-inch tall numbers and letters, found receipt proof of payment or decal for U.S. Customs, 3 copies of C-7A cruising permit, Bahamas immigration form. This must be completed beforehand, a standard airworthiness certificate, a radio stereo license, permanent registration certificate, operating limitations information, wind balance information, an altitude reporting transponder, and ELT comms that must be set to 121.5 MHz. This is all according to AOPA 2016. Some extra flight considerations for pilots is that they must file a flight plan to a Bahamas port of entry, file a EABIS. The pilot's also going to need to bring 1 life jacket per person. So they may want to bring some extra in case more people end up showing up, or they have to bring more people back to the US than they plan to. The pilot's also going to need a restricted radio telephone operator's permit and a letters of authorization. This is all according to AOPA 2016, Banyan Air 2018, and Banyan Pilot Shop 2018. Pre-departure considerations back to the US from the Bahamas include return flight considerations include that you must possess a U.S. Customs decal or decal proof of purchase, must depart from a port of entry in the Bahamas back to the U.S. The pilot must pay Bahamas passenger departure tax prior to departure. This is around $25 according to Banyan Air 2018. You must file a U.S. Customs declaration form, 1 per family. Pilot must call U.S. Customs to schedule arrival reservation, and if they don't, they may be issued a fine upwards to $50 or more. Pilot must file a flight plan and file a EAPIS. They also must receive a discrete squawk code from approach prior to entering the ATIS boundary. And pilot must not forget to close the flight plan. And this is according to Banyan Pilot Shop 2018. Extra considerations within Bahamas include that while flying within the islands, you don't need to file a flight plan. However, some airspace may require it, like MYNN. So it's important to check what airspace you're going to be flying in and whether it would require it or not. Something else to keep in mind is that you should have your cruising permit readily available or the C-7A form. Extra considerations to just having a raft for risk mitigation. This is suggested but not required. However, if you do end up having a ditch in the water, you're probably going to want to end up having a raft. And this is according to Banyan Air 2018. I'm not now talk about flight planning. So during flight planning, you're going to still want to do your NW craft NOTAMs, weather, runway lengths, alternates, fuel takeoff landing distances, and just any other standards information that you need to receive. You're also going to want to do your PAVE checklist and just I'm safe checklist just for extra risk mitigation. And just some other considerations that max fuel of 208 Caravan is 2,224 pounds. We will not be taking this on the way to Bahamas because we are trying to bring cargo. So we want to take as minimal fuel while being safe, while taking as much cargo as possible. Pilot is going to be 145 pounds in total because I weigh 135 pounds and I'll be bringing 10 pounds of luggage. I'll be bringing 1 passenger who weighs 195 pounds plus their luggage with me to the Bahamas. And then I'll be bringing 640 pounds of fuel with 355 pounds for an hour extra, just to be safe, because some airports at Bahamas may be out of fuel, as fuel can be limited at times in Bahamas, making a total of 995 pounds of fuel. This leaves room for 2,400 pounds of cargo, which I will try to evenly space within the plane. keeping the more heavier stuff. I'll depart from Palm Beach International to MYNN on a heading of 132. This is a distance of 173 nautical miles, and we'll be traveling at altitude of 9,500 feet. We'll be using an economy speed of 145 knots with economy fuel burn of 355 pounds per hour. This is just to minimize fuel burn, and so we waste as little fuel as possible. Total time will be about 1 hour and 12 minutes with a used fuel of 440 pounds of fuel. We'll be bringing 995 pounds of fuel, so we'll have plenty to make this trip. And we'll also be using Bimini, VOR, and Grand Bahamas International Airport, which will be about 28 minutes into our trip as just visual identifiers to make sure we're going in the right direction. After refueling at MYNN, we'll then go to MYEF to refuel once again because our destination airport, MYAP, or Spring Point, Bahamas, does not have any fuel available. We'll be traveling to MYEF on a heading of 144, covering a distance of 124 nautical miles at an altitude of 9,500 feet. We'll once again be using an economy speed of 147 knots with an economy fuel of 355 pounds per hour with a time of 53 minutes using 360 pounds of fuel. From MYEF, we'll then go to our destination airport, MYAP. We'll be traveling on a heading of 132, covering a distance of 125 nautical miles and an altitude of 9,500 pounds or feet. The reason we are traveling at this altitude is just because it reduces oxygen risk. Of course, we'll bring oxygen mask with us to just further reduce risk of hypoxia. However, this just helps to minimize it. Once again, we'll be using an economy speed of 147 knots with an economy fuel burn of 355 pounds per hour. It should take around 53 minutes once again using 360 pounds of fuel. We brought 995 pounds of fuel after refueling from at MYEFs so we'll have 635 pounds remaining. This is crucial because MYAP doesn't have any places to refuel, so if we want to travel a little more around the area and they don't have places to refuel, we have plenty to play around with. I'll now discuss the return flight considerations and planning. We only have 635 pounds remaining. However, this time we'll have an extra passenger with us, making a total of 390 pounds for passengers, and once again 145 pounds for me, the pilot. However, this time we won't have all of our cargo, so we'll be down to 5,435 pounds of weight. Once again, we'll be traveling to MYEF to refuel, as MYAP does not have a place to refuel, and we're going to want to refuel as soon as possible in case something were to happen. We'll be traveling on a heading of 313, covering a distance of 125 nautical miles at an altitude of 8,500 feet to maintain VFR compliance. We'll be traveling, if acceptable, at an economy speed of 147 knots with an economy fuel burn of 355 pounds per hour. However, in this scenario, we have an injured passenger, so if it is a severe injury, we'll actually be using a max cruise speed of 175 knots with a fuel burn of 432 pounds per hour. On the economy side, we'll be traveling at 53 minutes using 362 pounds of fuel, and we'll have 273 pounds remaining, which is good because it leaves us plenty of fuel in case MYEF does not have any fuel remaining. And once again, though, if the passenger is too severely injured, we'll be using our max speeds of 175, and this reduces our time down to 45 minutes. However, we'll use an additional 15 pounds of fuel. From MYEF, we'll go straight to Palm Beach International, Florida. This is the case because we can just fill up to max fuel as we do not have our cargo. So we'll have plenty of fuel to make the trip. And MYEF is also a port of entry, so we do not have to worry about that. We'll be traveling on a heading of 296, covering a distance of 296 nautical miles at an altitude of 8,500 feet. We'll be using an economy speed of 147 knots with fuel burn of 355 pounds per hour. This is, once again, if the passenger is not too severely injured. If we use this, we'll be traveling there in 2 hours and 10 minutes using 755 pounds of fuel, and we'll have had 2,224 pounds from filling up at NYEF, which is plenty to make the trip. Once again, though, if we have to use our max speed, we'll end up using an additional 40 pounds of fuel, but this brings our time down to 1 hour 44 minutes. Finally, I want to leave off on why is humanitarian aid important. Biblical support for this is that God calls us to love our neighbors, so humanitarian aid is just one way we can do that. Also, by doing this, it shows God's love to others and helps glorify God, which is just one way we can point others and help bring others to God. Furthermore, Luke 3:11 says, "Whoever has 2 tunics is to share with them who has none, and whoever has food is to do likewise." It's just basically saying that whenever we have a surplus of things, we should just give that to others, and humanitarian aid is just one way we can do this. 1 John 3:16 through 18 also says that, "By this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brothers in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and truth." This states that just whenever we have a lot of stuff, we should be giving to others in need, because God calls us to love, and we shouldn't just be talking about it. We should actually be doing and reflecting in our actions God's love. Thank you, and these are my references.